Welcome to the third annual Inclusion Fusion Web Summit by Key Ministry. I'm excited to be with you today. I'm going to be talking with you on the subject of how we stand in the gap for adults with special needs when it comes to housing. My name is Ryan Wolf, and I am the Disability Ministry Pastor at First Christian Church in Canton, Ohio. I've been in this full-time position for a little over 4 years. I've been on staff at First Christian for over 12 years. Previously, I was in the role of family pastor, where I also oversaw special needs ministries at First Christian Church. It's been a huge blessing to be able to do this full-time as we have expanded our special needs ministries on multiple different formats. If you'd like more information about what we do, you could check out firstchristian.info and search for our special needs ministries. Today, specifically, I want to talk to you about how you can stand in the gap for adults with developmental disabilities when it comes to housing. What this conference is not going to be is a step-by-step approach on how to open up a group home. What I want to do is I want to share with you stories. I want to share with you stories on how we got to where we are today, and hopefully that will open your eyes. Maybe God will use this to help you see how you can be an advocate for adults with developmental disabilities when it comes to their housing and the different situations that they live in. So I'm going to do this by telling stories. The first story that I want to tell you about is about a friend named Clyde. And hopefully you've downloaded the PowerPoint and you can follow along with some of the slides. You'll see a picture of Clyde there. Clyde is a good friend. Clyde has since passed away because of a brain tumor. But before then, I got to know Clyde when I was working as the children's pastor on our staff. And Clyde was one of those guys that he just walked the streets. Somebody that you wondered if he actually even had a home, but he did. He lived in many different places for the short lifetime that we knew him. But as he walked the streets every day, one of the stops that he would always make was First Christian Church. And he would come in and he would talk to anybody he could talk to. And Clyde and I quickly struck up a friendship. And Clyde would come to my office every single day. And in my office at the time, I had a couch. And Clyde was somebody who was always tired. He was always dirty. And he was always unwell kept. So the daily routine was he would come in, he would talk a little bit, and he would lie down on my couch, and he would sleep. After his nap, he'd wake up, he'd talk some more, and then he'd be out the door and on to his next place. Well, one day, Clyde needed a ride home. He wasn't feeling well and needed me to get him home. So I drove him home. I didn't know where he lived, but he gladly showed me where he lived. And I found out that the living situation that he was in was not a good situation. God began to open my eyes to the fact that someone needed to be an advocate for Clyde. The group home that he was living in was not well kept. It was dirty. The staff there didn't take care of Clyde's needs. And we began to think, how can we help Clyde? So we made phone calls. We helped Clyde with clothing. We helped Clyde with a lot of different things. But ultimately, this was the beginning of us understanding that we could make a difference in the lives of adults with special needs when it comes to their housing. When I think about Clyde, I think about a Bible verse. I think about James 1:27. James 1:27 says this, says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Unfortunately, Clyde was polluted by the world. He was immersed in it, and he was surrounded by it. Clyde, wasn't a widow. Wasn't necessarily a literal orphan, but in many sense he was, much like an orphan. You see, he had no family. He had no real home of his own as he was stuck in a group home. And as I think about this verse, as I think about Clyde, I think how God is calling us to stand in the gap for adults with developmental disabilities that aren't in ideal living situations, that are separated from family or that have no family at all. I think of another verse, Proverbs 31:8 says this, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed." That's Clyde. He was being crushed by the world. He was being crushed by the system. and he needed someone to be a voice for him. We did what we could before Clyde passed away from his brain tumor. I want to tell you about another friend of mine. Her name is Coral, and if you have the slides in front of you, you can see she's on the left there. It's a picture of her at one of our Jesus proms from a couple of years ago. Coral was another adult with developmental disabilities that loved First Christian Church. She came to First Christian Church every Wednesday and every Sunday. She came Sunday for services, and she came Wednesday to volunteer for the church. And she had been doing this for years. And as Coral and I struck up a friendship as well, she became my special assistant. And she would work in sorting curriculum and getting stuff ready for Sundays and for Wednesday night programming. And we became good friends. And as Wednesday nights were over, my wife and I would take Coral home, and we'd take her back to her apartment. She was very independent, and she lived on her own. But we quickly found out, too, that Coral didn't always have the greatest living situation. Coral may not have had the greatest living situation because she didn't have a family. She was aging, and her parents had both passed away, and she didn't have someone actively checking on her as much as she would have liked. So over the years, as our friendship developed, we kind of decided that our family was going to make Coral part of our family. We decided that no one should be alone for birthdays, for holidays. So we decided that we were actively going to make her a part of our family. Our kids, even to this day, refer to Coral as Aunt Coral, and she has loved that, as we have kind of unofficially adopted her for different occasions like birthdays and holidays. And she still comes every Wednesday and helps and volunteers at the church. God continued to open my eyes on how we can make a difference for adults with developmental disabilities when it comes to housing, when it comes to advocating for them, being a voice for them, embracing them as part of a family so they don't have to live as orphans in our society. I want to share another verse with you, Ephesians 2:9. When I think about orphans, when I think about being a voice, when I think about making a difference in their lives, Ephesians 2:9 is another great verse. It says this: "So you are no longer strangers and outsiders. You are citizens together with God's people. You are members of God's family." What a great verse. I think everybody desires to be a part of God's family. I also believe that everyone desires to be a part of a family. And for those adults with developmental disabilities that are living in isolation, whether they're living on their own or whether they're living in a group home where they're not embraced by a family, we can make a difference for them. You see, too many adults with developmental disabilities live in isolation even if they have people around them. What do I mean by that? It's simple. When you look at so many adults with developmental disabilities, oftentimes the people in their lives are only there because they're paid to be there. Think about that for a second. Think about it. If the only people that you ever came in contact with were paid to be there, paid staff members at a group home, paid staff members at a day program, paid staff members at a job situation. What if you never had someone in your life or in your living situation that was actually there for you just because they valued you as a part of the family? You see, too many of our friends are slipping through the cracks because they don't have an advocate, they don't have a voice, they don't have someone embracing them as a part of their family. We can make a difference in this. You see, we decided to make Coral a part of our family. And we decided to start to challenge people in our church. We had at the time only about 12 members in our adult Sunday school class called Hidden Treasures. We began to challenge church members to say, what if you took one of these other folks in our Hidden Treasures class and made them a part of your family? What if you made them a part of your family just for birthdays and holidays? What if you made it a part of your weekly routine to give them a phone call so they didn't feel so isolated where they live? And we began to do this. And God continued to open our eyes in a way that we could stand in the gap for adults with developmental disabilities. The next slide you'll see is a picture of a guy named Tim. Tim, much like Coral, is an aging adult. He still has his mother, who is very much in the later years of her life. They've both moved into a nursing home together, and Tim started becoming anxious. So did Tim's mom. They began to think about this next phase of life for Tim, because Tim's mom knew that she wasn't going to be around forever. And Tim's lucky to still have her. But they began to think, if we were going to plan for a next step in Tim's life, who would be there to care for Tim? Tim's a part of our adult Hidden Treasures class at First Christian Church. He's one of those adults, like many adults with developmental disabilities, that has slipped through the cracks and isn't a part of the system. You see, Tim has lived with his parents, now just his mother, and they have always cared for him, and they have never gotten assistance from the system. So the system doesn't even know about Tim. But Rosemary knew that one day she was going to pass away, and didn't want to leave Tim a victim of the system, didn't want to leave him in an emergency situation like so many adults become when their aging parents pass away. So she began to have conversations with us at First Christian Church and began to say, what can we do to make sure that there's a good transition when I pass away? When she's talking like that, it's just amazing to have to think about that. But we decided that, Tim's an important part of our church family. We're going to make sure that he has a guardian situation set up for when Rosemary passes away. Guardianship of Tim will pass on to somebody. I began to talk about that. My wife and I talked about that. We're great friends with Tim and with Rosemary. We decided that we wanted to be Tim's guardian when Rosemary passes away. So we made that official with the court system. And again, God began to open our eyes through that as we began to think about how we can become advocates, how we can become voices, how we can stand in the gap for adults with special needs. And we began to think about guardianship. We began to ask questions about Stark County. How many adults with developmental disabilities are there slipping through the cracks that need guardians, that need somebody to stand in the gap for them, that can help them in their living situations, in their housing? We've come to find out that there were over 30 adults with developmental disabilities that were on a waiting list for a guardian. Some of those adults had been on the waiting list for 3 years, and even one person had passed away while waiting on the guardian list without someone to be a voice for them. When we found that out, that broke our hearts, and we said that cannot be. We also found out that adults with developmental disabilities waiting on guardian lists, 70% of them had experienced some form of abuse or neglect in their life because they didn't have someone being that Proverbs 31:8 voice in their lives. So we decided that we would work with the court systems, with other government agencies like APSI and the county board, to see if we could eliminate that guardian waiting list. So we began to recruit volunteers from our church to become guardians. They went through training through APSI and through Guardian Support Services, which is a great organization. And then we went before the court and officially became guardians for many of these people on this list. We're still working on eliminating this list. One of the most exciting things was one of our elders at our church named John became our first guardian. He went before the judge, became guardian of an older man. And he began to visit him where he was living in an adult nursing type facility. He went in and he noticed in this living situation where he was, he had sweatpants that were incredibly dirty. He noticed that he didn't have many things. And immediately John became that Proverbs 31:8 voice in his life, where he stood in the gap for him. And he said, hey, this is not acceptable. He shouldn't be wearing dirty sweatpants, the same sweatpants that he wears every day of every week. And John made a difference in his life, got him clean clothes, got him the care that he needed. And in this situation, his ward passed away. And John wanted to make sure that he had a funeral. In this situation, since he had no family members, he had no one to stand in the gap for him, he was just going to be cremated, and he was going to disappear as a name in the system. But John, because he became his guardian and made sure that he was standing in the gap and visiting him in his living situation, decided that he was going to take it upon himself to make sure that he had a proper funeral. And it was my honor to be able to officiate his funeral. And even if it was just me and John there, we know that that was the right thing to do, to stand in the gap for him, to make a difference in his life because his life mattered. We have many more success stories about how adults have become volunteer guardians. The next one I want to tell you about is about Cindy and Heather. You can see pictures of them if you have the PowerPoint you're following along. Cindy was another person that wanted to make a difference, that become that guardian, so she could be a voice and a helper. And she went and she became the guardian of Heather. And she was in another one of these these living situations where there was multiple people, and she wasn't well cared for. And Cindy's heart broke. She said, "What can we do?" She began to fight the system to make sure that Heather got the care that she needed. As her guardian, she began to do things and improve her living situation. But as their relationship grew, and Cindy's heart continued to break for Heather, because Heather was one of these people that was like the orphan that we talk about. What is pure religion? It is taking care of orphans. Here is Heather. She was literally an orphan that never had a family. Cindy made the ultimate step, and she decided that Heather deserved a family. So she adopted her, and she's moving into an adult foster care situation where she has become a part of her family. And as Cindy looks out into the facility that she adopted Heather out of, her heart continues to break, and she continues to pray to God about how she make a difference for all the other people in these facilities. Obviously, she can't adopt everyone, but there are other families that can. And we're working on that. We're working on making sure everybody has a great living situation. Another thing that we do at First Christian Church is that we offer respite care. Now, yes, we do respite events. They're on a quarterly basis for families, so they can go out and they can have a date night. As we ask families, what is the number one thing that they need? Obviously, one of the number one things that most families need is just respite. They need time away. They need time to rest. They need time for themselves. So we've done that. But we also know that, a respite event once every 3 months for 3 hours in one evening isn't enough for families. So we've decided, both on the volunteer basis and on an official staffing basis, to offer respite care for families. And there are some volunteers in our disability ministry that do take individuals into their home for weekends, for a week at a time sometimes, and offer respite care. We also, through our day program at First Christian Day Services, offer respite as part of one of the services that we provide. And we do that in the homes of some of our staff members. Because families need breaks. They need breaks that are longer than just weekends. And that's another way that we are standing in the gap for adults with developmental disabilities when it comes to housing. Because if a mom or a dad or a staff member needs a break, these folks are friends. They've got nowhere to go. Someone needs to care for them, and that should be the church. And the church can do that. We are doing that as one of the things that we provide. Another thing that we are doing through First Christian Day Services is adult foster care. We're doing this with one of the individuals from our program. The state of Ohio, one thing that's important to note is the state of Ohio is moving away from segregated work and living environments, and they're trying to move towards host homes instead of group homes. Because they realize that a group home, though it is the best situation that they can provide currently, it's not necessarily the best thing that they can do for an individual. So the state of Ohio is moving towards host homes. So that would be another way to say that would be more like a foster care situation where you have one family that cares for an individual or a few individuals, rather than a few individuals living in a home that has a new staff member coming in every 8 to 12 hours in a group home situation. Because if you have a host home and a host family or a foster family, they're going to be more invested. Folks are going to be better taken care And that's one of the things that we're starting to provide through First Christian Day Services is a foster care situation. Where we are in Stark County, it's interesting to note that in the year 2000, 2,000 people in the year 2000 received services from the Stark County Board of DD. Here in 2014, over 3,000 people are receiving services from the Stark County Board of DDD. Well, what that shows me is that numbers are growing. More people need services. And in a stretched economy and a stretched government, not all government agencies can provide all the needs of a given community. That's where the church can step in and help and provide services for individuals with developmental disabilities, so people don't fall through the cracks. We're doing this at First Christian Day Services. So those are some of the ways that we at First Christian Church are standing in the gap for adults with developmental disabilities with concern to their housing. Part of it is, just by kind of adopting folks into their family for holidays, for birthdays, and for making weekly phone calls to people. That's one easy way to do it. Another way, a more official way, is through guardianship. Our guardianship initiative is really growing, but there's still a need for more guardians for adults. So you can be in their home, so you can make a difference in their lives. So you can be that Proverbs 31:8 person that speaks up for the needs of others that don't have a voice. So we do that. We do respite care. Not only through just events, but through weekends, through weeks of vacation, where we provide respite care for families and homes of volunteers and staff members, and through foster care. We want to be training adults in our church that can be those host homes for families. There are many different ways that you can stand in the gap for adults with developmental disabilities. I just pray that God will open your eyes the way He opened my eyes so many years ago to the needs of my community. I pray that He will do that for you, and I pray that He will show you how you can make a small difference. And it's amazing where it will go from there. So that is my prayer for you. Thanks for tuning in and listening to Inclusion Fusion, the third annual Inclusion Fusion Web Summit hosted by Key Ministry. My name is Ryan Wolf from First Christian Church in Canton, Ohio. Thanks so much.